everybody, welcome to the next instalment of my travels through the Daniel Smith colours. Today I'm carrying on from where I left off. So the first instalment was the yellows, oranges and sort of through the neutral, the cool reds, sorry, the warm reds through to the neutral reds. I'm now carrying on through the neutral reds into the cool reds, the crimson type colours, and then into the violets, the purples, and working my way through to the blues. And I'll be stopping at Indant Throne Blue, so just at the point where the blues kind of really become blue and not purple. And the next sort of blues straight after this are the sorts of ultramarine blues, so the warm blues that are sort of just warm of neutral. Indant Throne Blue is slightly warmer still, so that's where we are with it. And I'm, as usual, I'm working from spot cards. Now, just to clarify, because I always get somebody comment, I have dampened with the tip of a brush every spot about 10 minutes ago while I was just making the last of my notes. So they have had a bit of a head start. I'm using a synthetic brush as always. It's a size 8 Proline Plus, a lovely weighted brush. You can really only get these in the UK. They're hard to get in the USA. I really like them. I think they're really valuable brushes. They are really economical and really, really useful. And if you do see them, you'll probably see two sorts. You'll see Proline, which looks a bit more like that in style, and the hairs are very blonde looking. And you'll see Proline Plus, which is slightly different. The fibres are a little bit different, a bit stiffer. I like Proline for brushes like swords and flats, and Proline Plus for rounds. That's just how I roll. And if you see them and you want to give them a try, please do. I think you'll find they're very useful. So we shall begin up here with Permanent Red first of all. Now this is a Naphthol Red AS, and you'll see if you go on the Daniel Smith website, you'll see the little codes adjacent to both Permanent Red and Permanent Red Deep. And what they are is a sort of subtype. They're a commercial pigment or a proprietary pigment made using Naphthol Red AS in a specific way, and they give two slightly different tones. So I just wanted to clarify what they are. Now these are really highly pigmented colours. Naphthol Reds are the sorts of pigments you often only really see in acrylic. They sort of lend themselves to acrylic terribly well. A little bit better than they lend themselves to watercolour in some ways, but it really comes down to personal preference, as always with these things. So it's not wrong to use them in watercolour by any means. It's just that I personally prefer them in acrylic, and I often see them in acrylic a little bit more. So these are not granulating, semi-transparent, heavily staining, and have a light fastness of 2. Now, a little mnemonic I often use when I'm explaining staining to people is the PQRS rule. Phthalocyanine, quinacridone, and red stain. It's not a universal rule, but it's a good mnemonic just to help you remember that those are the colours most likely to be heavily staining, and these are obviously no exception. Now, I'm working, as always, for swatching on Aquafine awful crap cheap hot press paper, because I think it's good for swatching on hot press, and hot press paper fits in a file more neatly. The black squares are just Spectrum Noir alcohol marker in True Black today. Sometimes it's Pro Marker, sometimes it's Copic. Depends what I pick up, okay? And I'm using cold water, not using hot water to assist with loosening the spots or anything like that. And if you've seen my previous videos, you'll know I'm skipping all of the Primatech colours if they are labelled Primatech on the charts. Some of them have become Primatech since these charts were made. I am not skipping those. I am skipping the Lunar colours, which are the ones that they've added a black to give faux granulation. I'm going to do all of those at the end separately because I want to compare them with each other rather than with the other colours. So if you really wanted to see the red Primatechs, they're in a separate video, and I'll link it up there in the iCards for you. Okay, quinacridone red now. Now, a word of warning with quin reds. A lot of quin reds use different pigments, and this one actually uses PV19, which is quinacridone violet, i.e. permanent rose, quinacridone rose, sorts of colours. It's a very cool red. A lot of quin reds actually use a much warmer colour. They actually use a the colour which we will see, or have we already seen? We've already seen actually over here in quinacridone coral, PR209, which is a warmer red. So if you are trying to copy a painting from a book or a YouTube video or whatever, and they used a quin red, find out which one they're actually working with, because obviously if you use a cool red when you should be using a warm red, you're going to get mud. So be really careful with that. That's a sort of word of warning. And this one is one of the dodgy ones in the sense that it's not typical quin red, which is the warmer of the sorts of reds. Anthraquinoid red next, aka anthraquinone red. Obviously you can read my writing on these. So just to explain, NG, not granulating, T, transparent, M, moderate staining, light fastness 1. I'm using the information Daniel Smith provided on their website. Some of you have commented before saying, oh, no, that particular colour is always light fastness 1. You've got it wrong. I'm using what the manufacturer tells me. Okay, I'm not psychic, and I'm also not going to look up the pigments to see what light fastness the pigment has, and that's the other danger. If you look in a pigment database or the colour index or anything else like that, you only find the light fastness of the pigment. That does not mean the paint, this paint, has the same light fastness, because it depends on the binder. If you've got a paint that's got a lot of lithopone in it, the light fastness will be lower than the pigment on its own. If it's got protective qualities like acrylic binders do, it will have a higher light fastness than the pigment on its own. So you can't always use that. And very often I do use pigment information to give light fastness, but I always say it's the pigments, not the paints. I can't talk about the paints always. So anyway, back to where we were. Anthraquinoid red, not granulating, transparent, moderate staining, and it's not rated with the ATSM for light fastness, but Daniel Smith gave it a light fastness of 1. Now I know that might have changed since this was published. Honestly, I don't care, so don't bother telling me that they've changed it, because it makes no difference. I'm not going to re-record the fucking video just for your benefit. Things change. The next time it gets rated, it might go down. I'm only doing it based on this set of swatches that I have to work from. So that's quite a nice red. It's just starting to get to the point where we're getting now to the really cool cherry reds, which are really very pretty as we head towards the crimsons. And that's a nice alternative to permanent rose. Some people like to use that instead of sort of the rose red, quinacridone roses and so on. Mayan red next. Now this is another of these myochrome pigments. This uses myochrome red R2051, which is pigment red 287. It is granulating and transparent, low staining with a light fastness of 2. And these are all obviously based on a nanocrystal technology that was based around some colours the Mayans may or may not have actually used. It's invented by the University of Texas, or part of the University of Texas. Can't remember which part, doesn't really matter. And Daniel Smith licensed the patented technology from that university and use it in their paints for all of their Mayan colours. So there we go. I'll let that dry down a little bit and we'll have another look at it, because they need to dry for them to really granulate. Alizarin Crimson now. Now this is true alizarin crimson, so this has got a light fastness rating usually of 4. This is unrated with the ATSM, but it's predicted to be 4 by the company. It's not granulating, it is transparent, it's moderately staining, and it's PR83, which is true alizarin crimson. And you'll see when I put them down that this is not the same colour as a lot of the permanent alizarin crimsons. I actually prefer this colour. It's made of an extract of rose madder, and if you use genuine rose madder, that's a mixture of this and another pigment and bits of plant material effectively, and also low on the light fastness front. Perfectly okay if you're only going to use it in an art journal, or if you're going to put it in a closed book or whatever. I wouldn't put too much fear into the fact that it's light fastness 4, because remember, all the paints before about 1900 had what we would now consider low light fastness, and a lot of paintings have survived perfectly well with minimal restoration. So it's not something in the really short term you need to panic terribly about. And I know a lot of people do worry about it a bit unnecessarily, I think, because unless you intend to hang a painting in absolutely bright sunlight, and if you do that, I'm sorry to say you're a fucking idiot. You do not hang fine art in bright sunlight. It is the first rule of owning a proper painting, is that you don't do that. and as long as it's framed properly behind something suitable, most of the time it isn't going to matter enormously in our lifetimes. Now, okay, you might need, if you've got something made with actual rose madder that's 200 years old, yeah, that's a different story. But for most people, for most paintings that they do that might be held onto by a loved one and will probably go in the bin at some point in the next 100 years, is it really that important? So, this is the alternative. Permanent alizarin crimson. It's not the same. This is cooler than this is. This has a bit more texture than this does. This is a mixture of PR177 anthraquinone red with PV19 quinacridone violet, which we also just saw here, and PR149 perylene scarlet, which Daniel Smith also sells, so you could just mix that yourself. It's a convenience mix, so don't worry too much about it. If you don't have it, you can make your own. Carmine next, non-staining, semi-transparent, non-granulating, semi-transparent, heavily staining, again unrated, and probably a light fastness of 2. It's a wonderful cherry red, and it's made with PR176, benzimidazolone carmine, and is that not just beautiful? It's a really, really nice, bright, pinky carmine, and really nice. And I've just been using a real carmine lately, a cochineal beetle extract. This looks nothing like it, but it's a lovely pink all of its own. Really like that. It's a really nice pink. That could be a nice alternative again to permanent rose if you wanted to just mix things up a little bit. I'm now going to flip the paper upside down because the disadvantage of zooming in is I can't go too close to the stems of the tripod. So this is Opera Pink, which has got a light fastness unrated, but they predict 4. It is granulating and transparent, and it's a mixture of pigment red 122, which is quinacridone red, and a rhodamine in resin. Now what that means is rhodamines are soluble dyes, and to prevent them going everywhere and ruining your painting, they bind them so that each particle of dye is wrapped in a resin that is not soluble in water. So they basically sort of, if you can imagine, they glass coat the little particles of dye so that you still get the effect of the colour, but it doesn't spread everywhere. That gives the effect of mild granulation, which is perfectly normal in this colour, and the rhodamine is fluorescent. I have got a video on Opera Rose which you can watch if you want to, and I'll link that up in the iCards. Opera Rose was what Winsor & Newton first called it when they invented it in the 1950s, and then all the other companies have sort of taken it over, and a lot of companies don't use the original rhodamine formulation anymore. This looks like a rhodamine. Some of them use proprietary fluorescent pink pigments that are not rhodamines but can be enveloped in resins in the same way. Fluorescent dyes, they're not pigments, they are dyes. And what happens when this fades is the granulation stays there, but it becomes a kind of much more subtle granulation, and the sort of fire, the really bright, vivid pinkness of it fades away, but you still have the PR122 quinacridone red underneath it. So you will still have a pink, but it won't be as vibrant. That's the only thing that happens. Next up, Potter's Pink. Now this is notoriously hard to re-wet, so I'm going to re-wet that a second time and give it a bit of slow massage while I talk to you. It is granulating and semi-transparent. It does not stain particularly heavily, light fastness 1. It is PR233, which is tin chromium silicate, which is obviously also known as Potter's Pink. It's a really beautiful, interesting colour, and it reminds me of Caucasian skin at sunset. So if you're painting someone outside, this could be useful. The problem with it is the granulation is so strong that if you make any mixes with this, it jumps out of them. If you want to try that, mix it with something like Windsor lemon yellow, or any sort of non-granulating light colour. You'll get lovely mixes, lovely interesting sunsetty sort of colours. And then you leave it half an hour and you find you've got back to yellow with pink spots because it's leapt out of the mix. I just can never figure out what to do with that colour. It's one of those colours I just can't find a home for, really. Next up, quinacridone pink, which is non-granulating, transparent, moderately staining, light fastness 1, and it is made with PV42, which is quinacridone violet. And this is a really, really, really gorgeous colour. Now there are quite a few different pigments called quinacridone violet. There are quite a few called quinacridone red. That's just how it is. This is not the standard quinacridone violet, which is what we would usually use for permanent rose, quinacridone rose, those kinds of colours, which is more like this colour over here. This is much more vibrant. This looks a little bit similar to Opera Rose, and I would always say to people who want a sort of surrogate for Opera Rose, this is a really good surrogate because it's got the same hue and the vibrance, but it hasn't got the fluorescence, so it isn't going to be like labile, it isn't going to fade. Could be a nice one to use. Next one we have is quinacridone magenta, which is moderately staining, unrated light fastness, but probably 1. Non-granulating and transparent, and is made with PR202, which is quinacridone crimson. I've just realised I've missed out quinacridone rose, so I will come back to that later on, and we won't sort of miss that out and worry about it too much. Is that not just a beautiful crimson? Really nice. That's a good alternative to alizarin crimson. I really, really like that. That's very, very nice. The problem with doing this is I do miss out colours as I sort of transcribe the swatch charts in front of the TV the night before a film. So I will, when I get to the end of this set of 32, I will do the other one at the end for you so you don't miss out. Next up is Pyrrole Crimson, which is again unrated light fastness but probably 1. It is non-granulating, semi-transparent, moderately staining, and this uses PR264, which is Pyrrole Red Rubine, which I know Winsor & Newton used really recently as Sanguine Red, and I also know that Schminke have used this in their 2017 release. I can't remember which colour it is used in, but if you look in the iCards you can watch my Schminke 2017 release video, and you will find it therein if you're interested, because I think the Schminke one has got a bit more of a vibrant colour to it. It's one of those pigments that suddenly started being used in the art world. I think it's probably a lipstick pigment originally, and it's made its way into fine art recently. Next up, quinacridone fuchsia, which I've been curious about for a while because Peter Sheila, who's amazing, and I'll link to him, he's got the most amazing line and wash channel. He uses this a lot. It's non-granulating, transparent, moderately staining, unrated light fastness, but probably 1, and it uses PR202 again, which is quinacridone crimson, so the same as the quinacridone magenta that we just sort of looked at a few ago. Now this is a little bit more deep and a little bit more cool, but it's an almost imperceptible difference when wet. What I will say about a lot of Daniel Smith colours is a lot of them are really subtle variations on a theme, and I don't really need that level of subtlety myself, so we'll look at them again later. Next up is Mayan Violet, which is low staining, light fastness 2. It is granulating and transparent, and it uses PV58, which is Myochrome Violet V200 IF, or 1F, I can't remember which. And this is again another one of those nanocrystalline Mayan pigments. Very nice colour. I do like a nice granulating purple. There are not that many granulating crimsons out there, and this is a nice one. This is not really a violet to my mind, this is really a crimson. I would sort of call this Mayan magenta if it was me, because I don't see this as really being a violet. Violets to me are much more blue than this, but it's pretty, and it'll be interesting to see what it's like when it's dried down. Next up we have Bordeaux, or Bordeaux if I'm going to say it properly, and Bordeaux is non-granulating, semi-transparent, moderately staining, and has a light fastness unrated, but probably 2, and it uses PV32, which is benzimidazolone violet. And this is not a colour I've really used much before, or not a pigment I've really used much before, but it's very pretty. Doesn't look an awful lot like Bordeaux wine, far too bright for that. But again, it's a nice magenta, a nice carmine kind of colour, more magenta than carmine. And we'll have a look at it when dry, and we'll see how that compares to the others, because when they're wet they're very samey, and we'll have a little see how that looks when dry. So next up we have Quin Violet. This uses PV19 and it is non-granulating, transparent, heavily staining, and has a light fastness 1. This is a really, really, really nice version. Now, PV19 can be ground to all sorts of different finenesses, and that gives us different shades. It can be used at different purities. It can be varied, and this is a nice, more violet version. I know that there is a PV55 Quin Purple, I think, now in Daniel Smith's range that clearly wasn't in it when this spot card was put together, but that's a lovely colour, and if you want an interesting purple, I really recommend that. Next up, Permanent Violet, moderately staining, light fastness 1, non-granulating, semi-transparent, and this uses PR88, which is Thio-Ingold Violet, and this is a really nice violet, and again, one you don't see an awful lot anymore. It's been withdrawn from a few ranges, actually. I think because the colours it was in just didn't sell. I don't think it's been withdrawn for any other reasons. But it's nice. It's got a lot of texture, even though it's non-staining. Its movement is very strong, and it'll be interesting to see that once it's dry. Perylene Violet next. PV29, good old Perylene Violet. I love Perylene Violet. I love all Perylenes, actually. And this is non-granulating, transparent, moderately staining, unrated light fastness, but most likely 1. And this has a wonderful sort of dried blood kind of tone to it, which you can't not love. And there is a painter who uses these kinds of colours to look like blood, and sort of paints as though he's painting in blood, using the various Perylenes. Perylenes are great. They go a long way, and they are very transparent, really beautiful. Next up we have Cobalt Violet. Now this Cobalt Violet is not the same as Cobalt Violet in most ranges. The next colour, Cobalt Violet Deep, is more similar to Cobalt Violet by most manufacturers. I just want to put that out there. This is a granulating, transparent, non-staining and light fastness unrated, but probably 1 colour, which uses PV49, which is Cobalt Ammonium Phosphate, aka Cobalt Pale Violet. And Cobalt Violets, plural, are really hard to lift. They're like Potter's Pink. Phosphates, silicates, generally hydrophobic, really hard to remobilise. And as it says on the tin, it is pale. But nearly the entire spot has remobilised, so it's not a case of I have not lifted all of it. It has fully 100% lifted. The entire spot is obliterated from the swatch chart. It's just a very pale pink. I like it, but it's a bit so what. I use Cobalt Violet, the next one, a lot, and I find that one there a little bit depressing. Cobalt Violet Deep is granulating, transparent, light fastness 1, low staining, and this uses PV14 Cobalt Phosphate, aka Cobalt Violet, and this is what most companies call Cobalt Violet. It's a really versatile colour. It's wonderful for mixes for skies to make all sorts of sludgy greys. And I like mixing this with cerulean blue, particularly to make a really soft sort of bluey grey that I find very enjoyable for stormy skies and moody scenes like that. And I paint a lot of seascapes because I overlook the sea. So both at work and at home I overlook the sea. So it's always sort of there and gets painted in all weathers. It's a really nice colour, and once that granulates up as it dries, it will look really impressive. Next up we have Ultramarine Red, which is light fastness 1, granulating, transparent, low staining, and it uses PV15 Ultramarine Violet. Now there are several Ultramarine Violet versions, and this one is one of the very red rather than the very blue. And these are again quite versatile and quite useful colours. And a little bit of effort needed to get this one to fully lift. Obviously I wetted these in advance, but they're probably drying down a little bit now. It's quite warm here underneath the different daylight bulbs I have around me, which are all filament bulbs because they give better daylight than LEDs do. Someone did comment, what are these particles? Are they paper? Sometimes, but mostly actually they are just paint that hasn't fully dispersed. I'm not worrying about it. I'm just going to ignore it. It's not the end of the world. I am trying to brush them to one side as I go, but I'm not sort of worried about that. The Daniel Smith swatch charts are on really bad quality watercolour paper, so that's why it's lifting really easily with even light scrubbing. Next up, Rose of Ultramarine, which I have a faking it video on, which you can find on my channel. I'm not going to link to it in the iCards because I will run out of iCards because you only get 5 per video. This is a convenience mix. It's moderate staining, granulating, transparent, light fastness 1. It's just ultramarine mixed with quinacridone violet. There's nothing special about this at all. And what happens is as it dries, the blue kind of granulates out, and so you get a sort of pinky purple background with a blue foreground. And it's nice. I mean, it's a pretty mix, but A, what do you use it for? And B, you can just mix it yourself. There's nothing to stop you mixing this yourself. If you do actually use this regularly, I mean, I don't mean like now and again you might find a bit of use for it in the odd painting. If this is a regular colour you use, tell me down below in the comments why. What do you use it for? Why do you find it so useful? Because I find it a bit of a novelty. It's pretty, but what the hell do you do with it? I think you could paint monochromes with it and it might be interesting, but then so what? Can mix it myself. Next up is another convenience mix of exactly the same 2 colours. Imperial Purple, which is granulating, low staining, light fastness 1, semi-transparent, ultramarine and quin violet, and I think in this case it's got more ultramarine and less quin violet. I think the formulation of this may have been changed. I think it may, or it may be that Daniel Smith's website is wrong, because it looks a lot more like it's dioxazine violet and ultramarine blue. Don't bother commenting, I will check that later and comment over on my website about what it really is. That's a really so what colour for me. That's not very impressive at all, but we'll see what it's like when it dries down, because it might suddenly become impressive. Somehow I don't think it will. Okay, next up is Ultramarine Violet. This is granulating, transparent, light fastness 1, and uses PV 15 Ultramarine Violet. And this is more similar to Winsor & Newton's Ultramarine Violet than the Ultramarine Red is. Wallace Seymour have an Ultramarine Pink that is very similar to the Ultramarine Red in this one, and that's in their artist range. I think it's in the vintage range as well, but certainly in the artist range. Most of the Ultramarine Violets on the market are quite low pigment load because it's expensive, and also you don't want to overdo it with these kinds of colours because they have to be quite dilute to get the granulation to really show off. So I've added a bit of extra water to that, give it a chance to really granulate. Next up is what they call Carbazole Violet, which is an unrated light fastness but probably 1. It is non-granulating, semi-transparent, moderate staining. It is dioxazine violet, PV23, which is dioxazine violet in most ranges. It's one of the most common purples out there and got this huge intensity. Really easy to release. It's always a very fine grind and very pretty, but easy to overdo it. That's always the danger with this. I've seen a lot of beginners get carried away with this and just plaster it on, and they lose the beauty, because the beauty of this is when you use it quite dilute. I think that's an essential for anyone doing anything where you need a lot of purple, like botanical painters. You have to have that. It's just no way around it. You can't mix a purple of that intensity. Next up, Cobalt Blue Violet, which is granulating, semi-transparent, low staining, light fastness 1, and this is a convenience mix. This is just quinacridone violet, PV19, mixed with PV28, which is Cobalt Blue, aka Cobalt Illuminate Blue Spinel. So this is just like mixing Cobalt Blue with quinacridone rose. Not really going to be any different to that. And it will granulate out of the mix, and very much like Rose of Ultramarine, it will give us a sort of two-layered textural effect, and that's a very common mix. People use this a lot for that reason. So it's convenient having it in a tube if you want to have it at that particular ratio at all times. I don't, but you know, some people might. Next one is Moon Glow, which is one of Daniel Smith's most sort of well-known convenience colours. And I realise I haven't written all the colours on here. I've obviously been a little bit tardy with writing them on, which is rather silly of me. And this one uses PG18, which is Viridian, hydrated chromic oxide, PB29, which is ultramarine, and PB177, which is, sorry, PR177, which I'm just looking down my list that is next to me to see if I had the common sense to write it on there. And I've got cramp in both legs. I think it's a benzimidazolone red or something similar to that. I can't honestly remember off the top of my head. It might even be a naphthol red. I'm just seeing if it's on. Oh no, it's anthraquinone red. That's what it is. And I bought a tube of this out of curiosity because I couldn't see why people raved so much about it. And to be honest with you, I still can't. I mean, it's pretty, but so I could make it myself. I could just mix this. And I have. You know, there's nothing about this that you can't just mix. I'm going to put a lot of water down with this one because I think it's at its prettiest when you let it really granulate. And to do that, you need a lot of water. To get colours to granulate, it's kind of counterintuitive. They do it often because they don't like water terribly much. So if you put a lot down, they will clump. And that gives the granulation. I mean, it's nice, but you can mix it. We'll come back to it. It has to dry. You can't really appreciate Moonglow wet. Next up is what they call Shadow Violet, which is unrated light fastness, but probably 1. It is granulating. Ow, ow. It is transparent. It is non-staining. And it uses PO73, Pyrrole Orange, PB29 Ultramarine, and PG18, again, Viridian Hydrated Chromic Oxide. You can mix this one yourself as well. And I know some of their colours are co-precipitated so that they mix the pigments and then grind the mix. They should mix the pigments together, dry them down and grind them and make a sort of 3 colours in one. But this is not, because the whole point of this is they're meant to separate out and give you that sort of interesting granulation and granulation staining contrast. So next up is Indigo, which is obviously a fake indigo. You don't see very many real ones on the market anymore, but they're still sold. They're very nice. This is non-granulating, although it should granulate a little bit. Transparent, moderate staining, unrated light fastness, but probably 1. And it uses PB60, which is indanthrone blue, and PBK6, which is carbon black. So you will get a sort of particulation, which may not be considered by everyone as granulation, but it's as good as. So lovely dark blue, very true indigo hue, because it isn't a real indigo, it is a hue. And the black that's in there gives it the particulation that you get with real indigo, because real indigo is heavily granulating. Very useful colour, but not essential. Next up we have Mayan Dark Blue, which is non-granulating, semi-transparent, low staining, light fastness 2, and this uses PB82, which is Myochrome Blue B2050, another of those Mayan colours. I've not actually seen this particular one before. Lifts very, very easily. It's a lovely dark colour. I actually prefer this to Mayan Blue, I think. Mayan Blue got moved into the Primatech line, genuine Mayan Blue that is, which I don't think uses a Myochrome colour. I think it's a mixture of copal. If it is genuine, it's copal, indigo and a clay. And I don't think that's what this is. I think this is a Myochrome colour. And last but by no means least on this chart, this is indanthrone blue, which uses indanthrone blue. Non-granulating, transparent, moderate staining, unrated light fastness, yet probably 1, and it is a really beautiful colour. This is one of those colours that I really love. If you want a dark blue in your palette, this is a good dark blue to have. It's got a similar hue to ultramarine but without the granulation, and it's got a lovely transparency and a depth to it because you get nice movement which makes interesting tones. I like that one a lot. So, wash my brush. I'm going to flip these over, zoom you out, move myself into a position where my legs aren't going to sleep, and we'll go through all of them now they're dry. So, permanent red and permanent red deep, there is not an enormous difference between them. This is warmer, this is cooler. Quinacridone red is nice, starting to get cool now as we move across. Anthraquinoid red, very similar. There's not a huge difference between those two. Mayan red, lovely granulation. I mean, look at that, it's so pretty. Alizarin crimson real looks more like quin red or anthraquinoid red. Fake alizarin crimson, permanent alizarin crimson, is almost like a marker pen red. It's not the same at all. If you want reality, I mean, I would almost go with carmine as an alternative to alizarin crimson. They're closer. It's a nice carmine, very flat, but it is nice. Opera pink, very similar to opera rose in any line. Potter's pink, very similar to any line. I mean, I think there's only one manufacturer of that pigment in the world. Quinacridone pink, which uses quin violet, PV42, is very nice. That's a good alternative to quin rose. Quinacridone magenta, which uses quin crimson, is really beautiful. I mean, I really do like that a lot. Pyrrole crimson is very nice. I like that. It's a very useful colour. Quin fuchsia, not overly impressed with that. I think that's a bit dull. Mayan violet, I really like. The granulation in that is really beautiful. Bordeaux, again, a really interesting colour, and I like that a lot too. Quinacridone violet that uses quin violet PV19 is nice, but that's very dull. Thioingold violet I think has got a bit more life than this has got. Perylin violet is that nice almost dried blood colour. Cobalt violet, the sort of pale version, has got that nice pale granulation there, and the sort of proper version, Cobalt violet deep, has got that nice deep detailed granulation. Ultramarine red has got a lovely granulation too. Rose of ultramarine is exactly like I said it would be. You've got that granulating blue coming out of the mix and leaving the pink in the background. Imperial purple is the same kind of idea. You've got granulation over a purple flat. Zoom me back out again. Ultramarine violet is similar to ultramarine red, just a bluer version. Dioxazine violet, carbazole violet, whatever you want to call it, is really beautiful, really deep, moody purple. Cobalt blue violet is again another of those convenience mixes. Swing you around so you can see it, and you see there you've got a sort of neutral blue on top of a pale purple. So what? Moonglow, you've got the green kind of coming out of the mix there, the viridian, and then you've got over the top of it the blue coming out of the mix, and it leaves the red in the background. I mean, it's interesting, but so you could just mix that. There is nothing to stop you faking that, and I think you should, because it saves you money. Next up, Shadow Violet. Again, this can be faked really easily. You've got the Viridian coming out of the mix there, giving those sort of green speckly bits, and you've got the Ultramarine doing the same, and then you've just got Pyrrole Orange in the background. So that's the same as Moonglow, it's just got an orange base, not a red base, that's all. Indigo, you've got again an interesting granulation there where you've got the colour kind of, the black kind of coming out of the mix a little bit. Mayan Blue Deep I think has got beautiful granulation. Let's just zoom in on that for a sec. Look at that, that's fantastic granulation there. And finally Indanthrone Blue, which is lovely and flat and not granulating, but it has texture to it. I just want to cut in with the colour I missed so that it's in here, so that we've done 33 colours this time, which is a shame, because if I'd stopped at the right point I wouldn't have had any blues, would I? I could have just done just the reds and the purples, but oh well, bugger it, life is like that sometimes. So I'll just set this up as I always do. What I actually do to do this is I just draw a 2" by 3" grid on with just with pencil, nothing remotely special about it, and it's terribly quick. And I just churn these out in front of the, just dropped something, I think it was my brush. I just churn these out in front of the TV normally. No, it was my pen. And there's me missing one, Quin Rose. And so this was so you've got a light fastness 1, moderate staining, oopsie, let's get focus. Okay, so Quin Rose uses PV19, which is quinacridone violet. It uses, sorry, it is non-granulating, transparent, moderate staining, and it is a light fastness 1 paint. I'll just pop that on for you, and yeah, it's exactly as you expect. This is the sort of bog standard permanent rose you get in every beginner's watercolour set on earth, I think. Called all sorts of different things by different manufacturers. Permanent Carmine by Schminker, Permanent Rose by Winsor & Newton, Quinacridone Rose by Daniel Smith. Same thing. Same pigment and same preparation pretty much to give you that colour. So there's the one I missed, so you won't miss out there. So the next instalment, just to tell you what colours we will be going through so that you know what's coming up next. We will go through the blues, starting with Genuine Smalt, which I know a few of you have been waiting for me to do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 13, 14, 15. So that will take us through to Cobalt Turquoise, and then we will go through, or pretty much, I don't think that's quite perfect counting on my part, then we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and that will take us through to about chromic oxide green or rare earth green. So we will have got through all the sort of vivid greens, and then the following instalment we will work our way through the murkier greens, the olives and the sort of darker greens, into the earth tones, and we will probably finish that instalment around somewhere like Terra e Colano. And then the next instalment will take us through the sort of Perylin Maroon, Quinacridone Burnt Scarlet kind of region, all the way through to probably the end. I think that instalment will take us through all of the standard colours, which will mean we end at Titanium White. And obviously parallel to this, I've been doing the duochrome colours already, and I'm going to do the interference, pearlescent and iridescent colours as well. So that's where we are. Thank you all very much. Good evening.